So I'm Heather Darby with the University of Vermont Extension, and as Andrea said, I've been with Extension now, it's going to be 17 years at the end of March. I started my job on April Fool's Day, actually, in 2000. And when I started my job, I remember I was bored for 2 months. And I was trying to figure out my place in the world, my place in Extension, my place in Vermont. And just started talking to people, and somebody said to me, oh, you got to go talk to Jack Laser at Butterworks Farm. I think you two would have a lot in common. So I met Jack, and I started to learn about grain production. That was not my background at all. I grew up on a dairy farm in Vermont, and I know everything about milking cows and shoveling shit, but I didn't know a whole lot. I knew about scooping grain out of a wheelbarrow to give the cows, but that was about it. And Jack was growing grain and then milling it, and when I went to his house, he made me a grilled cheese sandwich on homemade bread from flour that he had milled on his farm. And I mean, that was the first time I had ever actually, I believe, had a homemade loaf of bread. And our friendship grew, and what I began to realize was that there were other people in Vermont that were also growing grain. It seemed so odd to me. It didn't really seem like a part of my life growing up. And Amy had mentioned, well, Vermont actually did used to grow grain. We grew a lot of grain in the 1700s and into the 1800s, but by 1823, we were becoming a net importer of grain. So Vermont actually has been a net importer of grain since 1823. Essentially, when people stopped producing a lot of wheat in the Champlain Valley because they had kind of beaten their soils up and not taken care of them. And so these really high yields that they were getting declined very rapidly. And if you've been to Vermont, it's fairly hilly. And there was a lot of soil erosion and issues like that were really degrading the landscape. And people moved really to perennial-based grass systems with livestock. And the grain just largely went away, and grain was imported onto the dairies and still largely is today. But there was this movement, and in 2003, 4, 5, and 6, I started working more with these grain farmers, Ken Van Hazinga and Ben Gleason and Jack Laser and a few others that were trying to grow grain. And we're kind of the outcasts, I guess, in our state as far as farmers go. But something was happening, and people were becoming more interested in this local food movement. And they had started these local vor challenges where people were trying to buy food within a 10-mile radius or a 50-mile radius or a 100-mile radius. And what they realized was, well, they could get vegetables and they could get milk, but they couldn't actually buy staples. They didn't really know where to get flour or rice or anything like that. And so the 3 grain farmers that existed in Vermont became inundated with phone calls from people wanting, a bag of flour. And that's really where the new grain movement in Vermont started. And we started to have meetings in the basement of a pizza place. And it started to feel more like a revolution every day. Like the drums were almost beating. We don't have any drums today. Did anybody bring a drum? We were talking about this last night. You know that the Revolution drum? It is Massachusetts, right? You guys have one. I bet there's one somewhere in a closet here in this building. But that's, again, I'm feeling like that again today, where it's yet the start of our next revolution, a food revolution. And it's really exciting to be a part of that and be here and share a little bit about what we're doing in Vermont. So one of the things that we did right away was try to bring the growers together so that they could start to create information for the people that were calling them. and for new farmers that wanted to grow grain. So we started the Northern Grain Growers Association, and I believe that we actually became an official group in 2006. And the group is still active today. It is largely a Vermont-focused group and has been since we started, but we allow everyone to join. And the Northern Grain Growers meet regularly. Todd Hardy's here, he's on the board, and I think Randy George is here, and Andrew Peterson, so there are many of our members here today, trying to educate growers, consumers, and end users about the opportunities and challenges, real challenges, that exist with growing grain in our region. So I did bring some handouts, some brochures, if you'd like to become a member. And I think we're at a point where we're ready also, and our group has talked about this a lot, like, how do we grow our group? The time is now. There's a lot of interest in growing grain. So as far as research, I also started working on researching grain in Vermont, which hadn't been done actually. There hadn't been any grain research in Vermont since the 70s when I started. And there was very little at that time. And I went to the UVM Horticultural Research Farm one day to pick something up, and somebody said, hey, yeah, you know, we bought a grain drill for the researcher that did grain research in the 70s and early 80s. I think it's sitting out there in the hedgerows, which it was, very rusty. But when you have nothing, right, even the bucket of rust looks pretty good at that time. And so Roger Rainville, who's someone that I thank every day for traveling with me on these journeys, and I put it on a trailer, brought it to his farm, took the rust off of it, put on a new coat of paint. It had only been used, it looked like, maybe twice. And we had our first research plot drill. And we put some research plots in the ground and then wondered how in the world we were going to get them harvested. And same thing, back in the dungeon at the university, there was a little thresher that we found, and we pulled it out and put it together and threshed some grains that fall. It was a lot. It was a lot of work, and I think we only had 20 plots. But since then, with my colleagues, Ellen Mallory, who you'll hear from, and Mark Searles and Gary Bergstrom and many others, we've kind of rebuilt a grain research program in New England and the Northeast, and it's really exciting. I have thousands of research plots now, and on all kinds of grains and all kinds of topics. And I think some of you have come to our field day at Borderview Farm to show that off. We have 300 people attend the field day looking at grains, and then we have hundreds of people that come to see the plots as well. The other thing that we did through my program at UVM was we started a grain quality testing lab. There wasn't such a thing. I mean, Aaron is here now at Hartwick University and is blown the testing out of the water, which is awesome. Back in the early 2000s, when we were learning about what a baker needed to make a loaf of bread in regards to flour, we realized that we had no way to tell if the wheat that a farmer was growing in Vermont would make a good loaf of bread. And working with folks like Randy George and folks up in Quebec, they told us, well, you need to understand the falling number. And to us, that was the key to taking wheat from a Vermont farm and successfully being able to make a loaf of bread out of it. And I think I saw Randy somewhere in the back. And I always tell this story about Randy, which he's like, why do you tell people that story? Look at him smiling at me. He said he was so embarrassed of the bread. He's going to hate me now. Of the bread that he made from Vermont farms that he wouldn't even use it as a doorstop in his bakery. He didn't mean that because he chuckled afterwards. But the problem was really the falling number at that time, and we didn't understand that was kind of the missing link. And once we understood that, it was that same fall that Randy got flour from, I believe, Tom Kenyon, and he was baking loaves of bread with 100% Vermont flour. That immediate, just like a season, just that one little piece of information that as a network working together, we were able to garner and then put into place and it revolutionized, really, wheat production in Vermont and the ability to bring it to a baker and have them want to buy it. So we opened the testing lab, and it's still open today, and I have to thank the people that supported that. The NGGA was instrumental in helping us get the equipment. And I think we get about 500 to 600 samples a year from growers, and that was our goal. We want people to be able to send it, get results back right away, and put those into place and get their material out as fast as possible. So I already talked about the outreach that we're doing. Education and helping people learn is a huge part of obviously what we do at the university, but it's really important, and that was just one example of us reaching out to our neighbors in Canada and learning about what it takes to grow wheat that then can actually be made into a viable loaf of bread. And just keeping together as a group and learning from each other and learning from everybody else is what's made our farmers successful. I wish that we had more, and I think that's been one of the number one, I don't want to say complaints, but issues is that we don't have enough people anymore, enough extension focused on grain in our region to be able to go out and help the farmers that need help, learning how to grow a new crop. Okay, so we have some work to do. And we've also been, beyond just growing things in a field and understanding what the yields are, we also have been working to understand, what do consumers actually want? They have to eat this stuff. And now I'm really excited. I don't know if Roy's here. I haven't seen him yet. There he is, back in the back. He's raising his hand up. So as of November, Roy DeRochers, right here from Massachusetts, he used to be at Tufts University, has joined our team at UVM as the sensory scientist and is helping local businesses and farms develop products that people want and like the taste of and are driven to go out and buy. And he's working with a farmer and business in Vermont right now, Todd Hardy and Caledonia Spirits, to develop award-winning, it already is, whiskey. Yes. So Roy is here, yeah. And look, he's already drinking. Oh my God. The revolution. All good revolutions have alcohol involved, right? Because you're like, people drink too much and then they're like, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Let's go out and grow some grain. I stick to coffee myself, especially early in the morning. All right. So Roy is here today, and again, we're starting lots of great projects, so if that's something you're interested in with your business and trying to understand better what consumers want and taste and so on and so forth, you can connect with us through our UVM program. I see Andrea standing there, so I'm not sure she's giving me the hand wavy yet, but I've been at this since 2003, but I haven't overcome most of the major bottlenecks. Actually, I don't think I've overcome any of them, but I'm trying. There's a lot of challenges, and I don't know where Amy went, but she mentioned many of them. We just don't have the infrastructure that we really need to grow grain. It's been very difficult to build that infrastructure. It's starting, it's going slowly, and Amy mentioned the different processing that's available now that wasn't even a few years ago. But I mean, we still don't have we do have some mills in Vermont for sure, but we don't have just a mill in Vermont either. And that's really limited farmers to grow. Sure, there's a lot of people that bake bread, but they don't generally bake it out of a berry of wheat. It's got to be processed. And most, bakers or brewers are not processing their own grain. They want to buy it ready to roll. And getting it ready to roll takes infrastructure and knowledge that we just haven't had in our area for a long time. But it's growing. But we still have a lot of work to do there in Vermont and across the board. I'm getting the 1 minute-er. So, as I mentioned, this is not an extensive list of who's using grains in Vermont, but there's a lot of opportunity there. there's a lot of people that are using grains from somewhere, but not much is being used from Vermont or the Northeast. And, you know, we have new businesses coming in all the time, and Andrew Peterson's here and is making a huge difference in creating some of the infrastructure to move product out to these folks. But largely, the farmers are not connected to these folks, and these folks are not connected to the farmers. And on both sides, they find that extremely difficult to accomplish, right? And so you see all the studies, well, they're using a gazillion pounds of flour, so every farmer should be growing wheat, and you should stop dairy farming. Do you see my face? What? You know, it's not quite that simple. And I love doing that. What? And, you know, this thought that I know we're not saying we should get rid of dairy, but we are losing our dairies, but we can't forget that the livestock component of a sustainable agricultural system is critical. And it's especially critical in a grain market when not every pound of grain is going to make it into beer or bread. All right. So there's lots of opportunities. We're working on developing these grain centers, which I'd like to talk more about with folks at some point, following a Canadian model. And I brought handouts. I gave you the wrong, no, that's the right website. And we have tons of information on our website too. So Mark, your turn. Thank you.
When is your conference?
Oh yeah, so I did bring handouts to the conference. We have an annual conference. It's March 24th, and it's all things grain, so you should come. It's great.